Hi guys, so we've been hearing a lot about how the Northern Ireland Protocol has been causing a lot of disruption to businesses in Northern Ireland. This is due to the fact that Great Britain is now a third country and Northern Ireland is part of the single market when it comes to goods. Things at the beginning of the year for companies in Northern Ireland have been problematic, and while there has been the acknowledgement of the benefits the grace periods have provided, the adjustment hasn't always been easy. Some GB-based suppliers of goods to businesses in Northern Ireland have decided to stop supplying due to the hassle involved. This has been a concern both economically and politically. So Stephen Kelly, the CEO of Manufacturing Northern Ireland, was speaking to the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee on Thursday, where he talked about another problem facing businesses in Northern Ireland, something that wasn't actually predicted.
And most concerning was that 1 in 5, 20%, said that their UK suppliers were simply unwilling to continue to supply to Northern Ireland. When we get below the bonnet on that number, and that hadn't moved terribly much from January, but when we get below the bonnet on that number, it relates to essentially two things. One is the new complexities that were introduced on the 1st of January in terms of moving goods from GB into Northern Ireland, which the committee has explored a lot of. But in addition to that, and no one seems to be exploring this in any great detail at all, but it's actually the impact of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement as well as the protocol.
So the TCA is the agreement that was signed between the European Union and Boris Johnson last year, the one that Boris Johnson wanted signed as quickly as possible. That was signed last December. This is the one he's talking about.
And how the two of those documents and the two of those agreements, where there's frictions between both of those. So if I gave it, for instance, in the negotiations that led to the TCA, the EU were clear that the UK's position as a centre of distribution for Europe, and included in that would obviously be Northern Ireland, that position would be diminished. And that is an outcome from the negotiations that the UK accepted in the end. So as a practical example, I have a member who would purchase from a German EU-based factory a piece of engineering equipment. That piece of engineering equipment travels from Germany to that German company's subsidiary plant in Britain, where there's modifications made, and those modifications are for rules in the UK and indeed Irish marketplace. Because that axle has left the German manufacturers and it's left the EU's union customs area, its identity is no longer EU. And because there's only minor modification in the German company's subsidiary in Britain, it doesn't pick up a UK origin at that point. So the problem then is that when those axles are moved from GB to Northern Ireland, it is at risk of a tariff being applied. So whilst those German axles from a German company in a German factory can travel tariff-free to the rest of the UK, because it doesn't pick up a UK identity, because there isn't sufficient processing, and they're at risk of going back into the EU, a tariff then could be applied when it moves from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. Now, I know that there was no intent, either in the protocol or elsewhere, that we would have a scenario like that, where we would have EU goods who are supposedly meant to freely circulate to Northern Ireland would actually potentially have that tariff applied to them. But it's an outcome from the type of agreement that the UK and the EU have concluded in terms of its own future relationship outside of the protocol and outside of the operation of the border in the Irish Sea. It is resolvable. The challenge is that the operation of the protocol, the operational plan for the protocol, was agreed before the final agreement on the UK and EU's future relationship in terms of the TCA was concluded. And there is an opportunity in terms of continuing to have discussions around the protocol which can resolve an item like this, that would allow, for instance, the economic identity of that piece of engineering equipment to travel its entire journey to Northern Ireland. Pardon me, Chair. But that's one of the issues outside of the administrative challenges that GB businesses face in terms of sending to Northern Ireland.
So what he's basically saying here is that there are goods that are produced, for example, in Germany. They travel to Great Britain, which is outside the single market and the customs union. They're slightly modified. They lose their EU labeling, and then they travel into Northern Ireland, which of course is part of the single market. So this is a problem. Now, why are we facing this problem? Because Boris Johnson, I'm afraid to say, didn't want time to look into these types of problems. He wanted his trade deal as quickly as possible. Now, I've heard from people who are in Northern Ireland, and they have explained similar types of problems. Goods coming from Europe, their distribution center is in Great Britain. It's still there. You know, in some cases, we've heard stories of how businesses have moved operations into the EU, but in some cases that hasn't happened. There are still large distribution centers in Great Britain. So goods are moving into Great Britain, but anything that's moving from Great Britain into Northern Ireland is a problem. Now, Mr. Kelly here has said that there are solutions to this, probably within the protocol, but it does demonstrate once again that Boris Johnson's government wanted a deal as quickly as possible. And I've said on numerous occasions, if you want a good deal, you need to spend time and effort. Brexiteers didn't want to spend time and effort, they just wanted something. Boris Johnson created legislation to stop the government from extending the Brexit transition period. Remember the transition period last year. There was the opportunity in July to extend it for another 2 years. If that had taken place, probably problems like this would have been resolved before they had an impact. But now they've had an impact because we're now seeing these problems. The European Union had suggested to Boris Johnson's government to extend the transition period, but the response from Brexiteers was, we don't want to do that. So as I said, Boris Johnson created legislation to stop the government from extending the transition period. This is just one problem. No doubt we're going to find more problems, because yes, we're 6 months in and businesses are getting over some of the hurdles, but we're starting to see some of the grace periods ending. Now, there is a grace period due to end in September. I don't know if what's going to happen after that. Is the can going to be kicked down the road once again? But if there are conflicts between the TCA and the protocol, they need to be resolved. Now, I hope on the European side they're going to resolve it, because I don't put a lot of hope in Boris Johnson's government trying to resolve this. And unfortunately, from a political point of view, and we have to also look at the political aspect of this, the likes of the DUP have already latched on to this problem and are using it as a cudgel against the protocol. Remember, the protocol was not the problem here, it's the TCA. The TCA came after the protocol. The TCA should have envisaged types of problems like this, but it didn't, because it didn't have sufficient time to be created. It was quick and dirty in a sense. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?